Welcome to The Right Side, where we explore news, views, and opinions from an admittedly conservative point of view. I'm your guest host, Jim Twu, and tonight we'll be talking about the events that occurred at the 2009 Fort Hood shooting. And the story apparently has not been completely and accurately told even 10 years later. And my guest tonight is Colonel COL Platoni, a licensed psychologist who was a survivor of the Fort Hood shooting, and she'll set the record straight. Kathy, thank you for joining us on tonight's show.
It truly is an honor. Thank you.
So it's been 10 years since the Fort Hood shooting, and you're basically telling me that we still haven't gotten the full story. So what have we missed?
Many things. Okay. Probably the most important fact is that the Fort Hood Massacre is still considered an act of workplace violence, and the shooter is not considered an enemy of the state. So this is still, to this day, not declared an act of domestic terrorism, which it certainly was.
Okay. So Major Hassan was not just some disgruntled, you're basically saying Major Hassan was not a disgruntled employee, he was an active agent of a foreign
terrorist organization and a mentoree of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed by a drone in 2011. But he funded as much as he could in terms of charitable donations to terrorist causes overseas.
Okay, so now you were one of the intended targets of
Yes, I was.
Hassan,
yes,
but you weren't actually in the room where he actually.
I had been in the room where the shooting started. This is a very interesting story. We were all sitting in rows of chairs, waiting our turn, rotating through the rows to get vaccinations, to meet with attorneys, to have blood work done, to meet with a physician or a physician's assistant to be cleared for deployment overseas. In our case, it was to Afghanistan. And there were 45 chairs in those rows, and they moved very, very slowly because this building was packed with soldiers deploying and returning from the combat theater. At about 10:30 in the morning, a young soldier came up to me and said, "Ma'am, you need to come with me." And I said, "Why? Where are we going?" And he said, "Well, you're a full-bird colonel, so you need an escort." And I said, "I do? Nah, I'm going to wait in the back of the room like everybody else and wait my turn." So I did. And then several minutes later, another soldier came up and tagged several of us to go to another building to finish up our medical checks to be cleared for deployment. So it was definitely my lucky day. So I was to have been the shooter's direct supervisor, so I was a prime target.
Before that, had you met him already?
I had never met Major Hassan.
Okay. And did you know anything of him, by looking at his file or anything before that?
Absolutely nothing. He was from the active component of the Army, and we were an activated reserve unit. And in the Army, it's called profis filling. In other words, either an active duty unit will fill vacancies from the reserve component, or the reserve component will fill a slot from the active component. And in this case, we needed a psychiatrist, and Major Hassan was to be with me at Fob Wilson.
Okay. So at some point, so when the shooting occurred, you didn't know that this was a terrorist attack?
I had no idea.
And later on, you learned. How did you?
Very quickly. Well, I had been in the Soldiers' Dome, which was a few feet away from the building where the shooting started. And at 1:34 p.m., I heard one of the civilian employees yelling, "They're shooting in the other building." And I observed civilians stampeding out of the building, literally killing each other to get out, while everybody in uniform ran for the door to go to the building where the shooting had started. I was unable to get out the door because they were bringing in the dying and the wounded. Right. So we started trying to save lives, and unfortunately we were rather unsuccessful in doing so, because people that were being carried in, several of them had mortal wounds, several of them did survive, but are still trying to recover almost 10 years after the fact.
Okay. So, but how did you find out that Major Hassan was a terrorist sympathizer rather than a disgruntled employee?
That came months later because a lot of the information was covered up. In fact, even years later. So in doing my own research and reading all of the reports and talking to the people who were in the room during the shooting and being present at the court-martial in August of 2013, I've learned an awful lot of facts and truths that have remained under the surface, shall we say, for many years.
Okay. So, which terrorist group was he working with?
There is no actual named group that he was with. Okay. He was what we call a lone wolf terrorist. Okay. He was inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, but he made decisions independent of any terrorist organization to do what he did and to obey Sharia law versus the Constitution and to proselytize for what he wanted, which was to kill as many American soldiers as possible and as packed a room as possible.
Okay. Now, yeah, I assume you followed his court-martial, correct?
Oh, yes, okay. I was there.
So prior to him, going and doing this, was there any indication that he was a terrorist sympathizer?
Absolutely. There were 5 or 6 years of documentation, detailed documentation, in fact, that was collected by the Department of Defense, the Department of the Army, the FBI, and several joint terrorism task forces. They just didn't communicate with each other. And the report that came out in, I believe, February of 2011, A Ticking Time Bomb, illustrates how many people knew about his terrorist sympathetic organizations that he was following and that he was a terrorist sympathizer and that he was planning or at least advocating for the burning and beheading of American soldiers.
So basically the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing?
Exactly.
So then did anyone in particular specifically raise the flag that this guy, Major Hassan, is a terrorist threat?
Yes. The other residents in his residency program through the University of the Uniformed Health Sciences and during his residency at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. It was well known that he was a terrorist sympathizer, and every student that stood up and objected was told to keep silent because it was politically incorrect to call him out because he was a devout Muslim.
So do you anybody in particular telling these other people to be quiet that you're aware of?
Yes. I cannot mention their names, but there are 8 of them. Okay. They were both Major Hassan's military supervisors and civilian supervisors. And for their protection as well as mine, because I have been threatened, I cannot mention their names, but I sure keep them on my desk at work. Okay. And the politically correct thing to do was to continue to allow him to advance, though he was considered incompetent by his peers and his supervisors, and to even award him a prestigious fellowship in disaster mental health and to promote him and make it somebody else's problem.
Did his military record with regards to his performance evaluations actually make it to his court-martial?
Yes, they did, and they're very much sanitized.
Oh, so they're not completely public. They're redacted.
A lot of that information is redacted. Yes.
All right. So, but the thing is, I assume you've talked to other people, in your own investigation, and when you ask these people, well, why did you? What was the purpose? What was the utility of ignoring this? Other than, I know there's a political correct element.
That was the element of it. It was being politically correct, and according to Mark Thompson of Time Magazine, who has interviewed me a few times, he got a pass because he was a Muslim. Okay. And because nobody wanted to stand up and say anything that might look like they were against him in any way or that they were going to demote him in any way. It was all about political correctness. Okay.
But, I mean, there are other Muslims serving in the armed forces,
yes.
Correct? And I'm assuming that not all of them just get passes for various transgressions, correct?
That is correct.
So so the question then follows, why did he get this special treatment where other Muslims who are in other branches of the armed forces and other modes of service would be disciplined for whatever reasons?
You're right. He was a physician. Yep. The Army spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, sending him to medical school, putting him through his internship and his residency, and then awarding him a fellowship, it would have been a loss of tremendous amounts of funding.
So he was more of a higher prestige service member than someone who's like an enlisted person.
Absolutely,
like
because he was a physician.
In a lesser program, right?
And in the military, physicians are often considered gods.
Okay. Oh, okay. So he was a high-profile recruit.
Yes, he was a very high-profile recruit. In fact, he had been an enlisted soldier before he went to college and to medical school.
Based on your was anybody in the military aware of his sympathies while he was enlisted, or did these?
They kind of developed during his years of medical school. In fact, my next-door neighbor's daughter went to medical school with him, and she described him as being just one of the guys, as normal as everyone else. Okay. And I think it was afterwards, when his mother died in 2001, that things began to change. That was part of what contributed to his radicalization. The death of his mother, which he never really got over. The fact that he couldn't find a suitable marriage partner, even in his mosque. And the third thing was that he knew he was going to be deployed. It wasn't if, it was when. And in order to shut that down, he began to work towards killing as many American soldiers as he could to prevent the unit that he was going to be assigned to, which was my unit, right, from deploying, which we did anyway.
All right. But when he's going through these life changes, did anybody raise a red flag?
Yes, his fellow students. Right. But apparently, to the best of my knowledge, not his supervisors, not anybody from the military end of the house. Okay. Other than his fellow students. There were a couple of occasions during grand rounds and teaching moments during his fellowship where he was told to stand down because the advocating of burnings and beheadings of American soldiers, as you can imagine, not a good thing. That did not sit well, but otherwise he was given free rein. Okay.
I assume when he was going through medical school, he still had performance evaluations going through. Did any of those performance reviews mention these incidents or these concerns?
No, they were sanitized.
Okay. So all his superior officers throughout, I mean, I assume he had more than one superior officer throughout his process before.
Sanitized.
They all bought into it?
They apparently, from what I have read and what I can find out from the students that he did go through residency, internship, and medical school with, everything was sanitized. Okay. But
everyone at his rank or below were able to notice it, right?
Oh, yes, it was blatant.
Okay. Now it's been 10 years. We have a new president, and I don't think he has a reputation for being politically correct. Right.
I would agree.
With the new president, has anything changed?
Not yet, but we are working towards that end. I have gotten a phone call back from the White House. I've sent several letters to the president. We have asked for an audience with the president so that an executive order can be issued to reclassify the Fort Hood Massacre as an act of domestic terrorism and the shooter as an enemy of the state. We have not gotten that foot in the door yet. However, we are in the process of writing the next letter to the president. I do have a contact at the White House who is assisting us. We will not stop until we manage to get an audience with the president.
Okay. Now, for those who aren't familiar with how the military works, why is that important now, 10 years later, to have the Fort Hood incident reclassified as a terrorist attack versus a workplace incident?
First of all, so the families of the fallen and the wounded themselves and the survivors can obtain all of the benefits that they have coming to them.
Are there different benefits for being a victim of a terrorist attack versus being the victim of a workplace violence incident on military?
Because it's considered an act of war, which to this date it is not. So there are additional medical benefits.
How much are we talking about here in terms, or how is it different?
until you are made well.
Okay.
And that has not happened with those who were wounded. And certainly many of the family members have received most of the benefits that they are entitled to. That has not been across the board. And one of the reasons I cannot be more specific about that is because people are very afraid to talk, because this has the aroma of a cover-up,
right.
And many people will tell you the same thing. It is, many factors are being covered up. I too have been threatened twice, as I mentioned before, by elected officials.
Okay, but in terms of in the military, it's been 10 years, and the senior command or whatever might have changed in that period of time. Are the people who were responsible for the cover-up still in those positions of power and influence?
Some of them actually are, okay. Or they're in new positions of power, so they have much to lose. And one of the other, but this is a more minor issue, those of us who rendered medical aid under fire, those of us who ran towards the shooting, the many people who put their lives on the line and dragged those who were dying and those who were wounded out of the building under fire, should be eligible for a combat action badge and a combat medical badge. Of course, this is minor stuff compared to the major issues, but it's still an award that anybody who engages in those heroic deeds is eligible for in the wartime theater. The injustices that have befallen the wounded, the families, and the survivors continue, because this is considered something so minor when it's destroyed lives. There have been 6 completed suicides among the survivors. That's not even including the wounded, and 1 incomplete suicide, because people are so angry at the degree of betrayal and deceit. If you talk to Kimberly Munley, the civilian police officer who was the first on scene to shoot at Hassan, right. She has been betrayed and deceived by our former president in a huge way.
But in terms of, well, the medical care that they would receive if it was a domestic terror incident versus not, I mean, is it something like if it was a workplace violence, they go to the VA, but if it's a domestic terror incident, they go to the military hospital?
They go to a military hospital. Yeah. And some of them are, but being told that the only care that you can receive is through the VA, when this happened on active duty and the shooter turned Fort Hood, the soldier readiness processing site, into a battlefield, doesn't make good on the promise of the president to take care of everybody who was harmed by these acts of domestic terrorism.
For those who haven't served in the military, what's the difference then for getting care from the Veterans Administration versus being entitled to care to a military hospital?
That's a very good question. And I don't really have a good answer for that. I think it is more how that appears, okay, rather than how it really is. When you are an active duty soldier, you are entitled to certain benefits without having to wait. They're immediate, right, through military channels. So it's just, it speaks more of deceit and betrayal than affecting the type of care. We all know that there have been many, many problems with people getting adequate care through the VA. And that is another issue. But these people were injured on active duty, and they should have been taken care of by military hospitals as if they were on active duty. It's what we are guaranteed, and our government didn't make good on those promises at all.
Right. So, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, is the care at a military hospital for this type of injury or this type of trauma better or worse or than care through the VA?
Experientially speaking, I would say the care at military hospitals is better. Okay. And it's immediate. Okay. You don't have to wait. Right. As opposed to waiting, especially in situations where there's trauma. But just experientially speaking, I would say active duty care at military medical centers and hospitals is better. Well,
and this is the type of care that you specialize in, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, I know this is, it probably varies by person, but how long does it normally, or on average, does it take for someone to recover from something like this?
Sometimes a lifetime, right, especially if you're talking about psychological injuries. And I would say that PTSD is rampant among the survivors and the wounded. because of what they witnessed that day and what they have dealt with in the months and years since then.
What type of treatment does that normally entail?
Well, there are many ways to treat PTSD. Let's start at the very beginning. We were supposed to have many of the Army's top mental health professionals. We were supposed to have access to them. The Army spared no expense in bringing teams of these top mental health professionals, but they were primarily directed to provide services to the Fort Hood community at large, while we remained in lockdown in our barracks and didn't have access, without great difficulty, being able to get to these mental health professionals, many of whom were my personal friends. And we didn't get what we needed. In addition, we were two combat stress control units. Whenever there is a critical incident, and certainly this qualifies, you were supposed to go through a 7-step debriefing process. Right. And there are certain rules to be followed in that process, and that didn't happen either. And oftentimes, not that a debriefing will prevent PTSD from happening, it allows people to begin the process of healing. And that didn't happen, and then we went to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh. But it's been 10 years later. I mean, have there been survivors or people who were injured from the Fort Hood shooting are not getting any care to this day or haven't received the care that they needed?
That's correct. Case-by-case basis.
A percentage?
I would say of the 33 wounded, just by having spoken to these people, I would say maybe 2/3 haven't received all of the care that they have needed and are still undergoing reconstructive surgery or surgeries to correct the wounds that they had. Okay.
So they're receiving care now, but they're just not getting, they haven't gotten all of it yet.
They haven't gotten all of it yet.
And I'm assuming the military is committed to giving them the care that they need, or is there any indication that they're going to cut them off?
I think that a number of these people have been medically boarded out. Again, they have not spoken recently, so they're being forced out of the Army and to obtain their care, as has been the case for 10 years, paying out of their own pockets or going to the VA. And because these wounds happened on active duty, the VA is turning some of these people away.
So basically you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yes, and paying for it out of your own pocket.
Has anybody in Congress or whatever proposed any legislation to remedy that?
No.
Have you approached anybody?
I've approached about 14 or 15 senators and congressmen, one of whom is my own congressman, is on the House Armed Services Committee, and nothing has happened.
Right. But have they given you a reason why?
No.
Okay, we just don't think it's important.
No, go to the VA. That's what I get, and I've been told to keep my mouth shut. And
you've explained to them that the VA may not treat them because
it happened on active duty, and they are refusing. Yes.
And so a bureaucratic nightmare.
A bureaucratic snafu. Yes.
Okay. But and I'm assuming you're also trying to get in touch with the White House to see if they'll assist you on this.
If they will assist everybody. This is not about me. I mean, my wounds are psychological, which are very, very hard to deal with. I struggle every day, but I'm one of the lucky ones. I walked out of there alive. I'm fighting for the families of the fallen and for the wounded and for the psychologically wounded as well.
And do you have hope that the administration will listen to you?
I absolutely do, because I believe that President Trump is unaware of this situation, completely unaware of this situation, as are many people. Many people don't even know there was a Fort Hood Massacre, or have long forgotten.
Because it's been 10 years?
Because it will be 10 years on November 5th of this year. But I believe if the people that I'm speaking to at the White House will inform the president and provide him a letter that we have spent 6 to 7 months preparing for the president, if he does have a chance to read that, I believe he will give us an audience.
All right, we're less than 5 minutes left in the show. Is there anything else that you want to get out about the Fort Hood shooting that we haven't talked about already?
Oh boy, the numbers of red flags we've talked about at length. I would say one of the things that's been missing from this entire story is the Howard and Joshua Berry story. I think this is a critical story. Joshua Berry was in one of the second buildings that was also shot up, for lack of a better term, by the shooter, and in trying to get out of the building and to help others, sustained a serious shoulder injury and was also transported by ambulance to Darnall Army Community Hospital. Because he did not suffer a gunshot wound, he was denied a Purple Heart. Oh. He took his own life in 2013. His father, who has become a dear friend of mine, Mr. Howard Berry, has taken his case to the national press, to the White House, to every congressman and senator whose door could be opened for him, and unfortunately every door has been slammed in his face. He's taken this to Judicial Watch. In fact, we were in a documentary about that together. He has taken it everywhere. He's made a few steps forward, but I think what's keeping Mr. Berry alive, because he does have lung cancer, is this fight to get his son a Purple Heart. But if you didn't have a gunshot wound, you didn't count.
Okay. All right. Well, we're close to the end of the show. Thank you very much, Colonel, for your service, and thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you very much for allowing me to tell it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Now, this show is made possible by the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley, and Colonel Platoni will be speaking to the forum for July, which is when we're taping the show. But they also meet once a month, the second Tuesday of every month, and they have a variety of speakers every month, and that's what they're most famously known for. They usually meet at the IFES Hall at 432 Stearland Road in Mountain View, California. The speaker for August is Andrew McCarthy. He's a National Review columnist, and I believe he'll be talking about the Mueller investigation. And then in September, there'll be Kay James, president of the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the most influential conservative think tanks in the United States. And in October, Candace Owen will be the speaker, and she is one of the leaders of the Walkaway movement. So there's going to be an exciting roster of intelligent and provocative speakers at the Liberty Forum. And so if you ever go there, please visit the Liberty Forum website, and they'll provide the information on future speakers. And if you ever want to get in touch with them, I'm sure they'll welcome you with open arms. And thank you for joining us here on The Right Side. Remember, for almost every issue, there are at least two sides. Make sure the side you're on is the right side. Good night.